Okie doke. So I thought it might be kind of fun to talk about the course and non-duality and modern physics. So anyway, as always, thanks to Tim and Lynn and the School for Course in Miracles for making this venue available to all of us to share our inspirations and insights about the course. And I know we all deeply appreciate that because what a great opportunity to do this. So one way of looking at the world is through the lens, if you will, of science. And so I'm going to do a quick aside before we do an opening meditation, and that is this is actually really timely because Saturday I attended my 50th high school reunion via Zoom, and one of the people who was participating, who stayed on after the virtual Zoom meeting, was a friend of mine who lived around the corner from me growing up, who ended up being working in physics at Lawrence Livermore Lab. And we shared a whole bunch of interesting stuff about that. And Dave Van Dyke here and Abe, all been in Livermore for where my dad worked as a cyclotron supervisor. So I had that kind of influence growing up. I used to joke with people, I grew up in a nuclear family, literally and figuratively. Anyway, Dave's dad worked across the street from my dad at Sandia Labs, and so it's that the physics culture was kind of through osmosis. You kind of got that if you grew up in that area, or particularly if you worked in that area like Abe did. So my mom was always interested in metaphysics, so I kind of got the physics, metaphysics, collision course stuff just very, very naturally. So anyway, I've always kind of wanted to know, well, how does physics lead to metaphysics? And it seems like during our lifetimes, it's done that very nicely, because some of the discoveries that have been made really seen properly, I think, really support where the course is going, and erode the physical foundation just as the course does. So a quick aside though, the fellow I had the conversation with, who I lived around the corner from me, he had his worldview shaken a little bit the other day, or about a year or two ago, when he discovered that he was a test tube baby through genealogy research, and discovered he had about 40 or 50 siblings he didn't know he had. So his worldview got a little bit shaken, but modern physics really has shaken our worldview, even though most of the time we don't really think about it much. But the technology that we're communicating with right now would not have been possible had quantum mechanics not, given us what we now enjoy in terms of electronics. So, we're using technology that's, again, a product of a divided mind, but we can use the divided mind to get back to an undivided state. And I think that's the whole point, right? Using everything that we seem to be experiencing to get back to our right minds. So anyway, with that preface, I thought what I would do is start with the first paragraph in workbook lesson. Well, actually, what is the body, which is the section that begins where we're at in the chronological progression of the workbook lessons. So the fifth essay is what is the body, and I think it fits really nicely with this topic. So I'll just go ahead and read the first paragraph of that. And I didn't grab the page numbers, but if anybody has that handy, it's
425.
425. Thanks, Lisa. So the first paragraph goes, the body is the fence the Son of God imagines he built to separate parts of his capital S self from other parts. It is within this fence he thinks he lives, to die as it decays and crumbles. For within this fence, he thinks that he is safe from love. Identifying with his safety, he regards himself as what his safety is. How else could he be certain he remains within the body, keeping love outside? So I thought about that the paragraph, and I just took the first sentence, and I was thinking, well, the body is really just a poster child of the whole thought system of the belief in separation. So this, you could actually kind of extend that first sentence to say the universe, space, time, individuality, bodies, and all reflections of the dualistic belief in separation are fences that are real identity. The Christ mind, having chosen the ego dream, imagines he has built to separate parts of his self from other parts. Then I was listening to one of Ken's audios the other day, which is the Be Kind to Everyone audio. So a couple hours into that one, every once in a while, Ken touches on, modern physics, and I found a few things that he connected with on that. And he said, our real eternal identity is, well, actually I wrote, our real eternal identity is non-spatial, non-temporal, and non-local. And those are some of the physics adjectives that Ken Wapnick used in that Be Kind to Everyone audio. So I just was thinking, well, what does non-spatial mean? Well, it's outside and beyond the tiny dream of space is non-spatial. Non-temporal is outside and beyond the tiny dream of time. And then non-local is not limited or bound to the tyranny of specific aspects, forms, or apparently separate parts of what is truly one. And that's us. That's our real identity. But we keep denying it in so many different ways. But I think we're learning that that's a pretty painful thing, to deny that real identity. Yeah. So we're gonna come back to this one, but I think this actually fits nicely. Well, it's all interconnected, so I could have picked anything just about, of course, right? But I particularly like this sentence, and it's from chapter 10, which we'll read a little later. Son of God, you have not sinned, but you have been much mistaken. Yet this can be corrected, and God will help you, knowing that you could not sin against him. And I think that the sin or the belief in separation is really the dualistic dream that claims that we were successful in making up a universe of space and time and bodies and duality and things that seem to be separate from each other. And wow, what a photorealistic, beyond technicolor, high over-the-top production value movie dream theatrical production that is, huh? Okay. And then another quote from that same section: allegiance to the denial of God is the ego's religion. And I was thinking, well, you could also state that, or expand on that with devoted dedication to duality, separation, and the cult of indivi-DUALITY, personality separation. The silly, seemingly separate self is ego's pseudo-religion and pseudoscience, using whatever means it can to keep us mindless and focused on nightmarish effects rather than awakening from the dream of guilt. And another of Ken's ideas is, so Ken Wapnick suggests that probably the very last theory that physics will ever explore is the idea that the universe was fabricated by guilt. Not too likely to come up anytime soon in physics journals, right, or whatever. Just because the idea of avoiding that is not exclusive to the realm of physics or science. It's everyone's hot potato. Get it out of my mind, please, right? So as egos. So I was just writing, perfect, purely innocent idea of undivided oneness. You have not separated from your creator or any aspect of creation. but you have become adept at misunderstanding your projections. But by the inevitable, forgiving, happy mind training process our inner kindness teacher will guide us through, we will all correct and undo these unimaginably vast, yet hilarious from the perspective of truth, denials of the unity of eternity and infinity, reconciling all silly beliefs in sin, guilt, fear, death, change, uncertainty, and loneliness. So just musings on duality and its inevitable, happily inevitable demise in our minds, right? So I in the second chapter of a book I wrote just about a decade ago called The Geometry Code, the subtitle was Universal Symbolic Mirrors of Natural Laws Within Us, Friendly Reminders of Inclusion to Forgive the Dreamer of Separation. The original subtitle had Forgive the Dream of Separation. And I realized, well, forgiving the dream doesn't really do much. I have to forgive the dreamer. I have to get back to the decision-making mind and forgive the dreamer that made up the whole dream of space and time and duality. And anyway, so I had a number of quotes that my minuscule, with room for your finger, you can put it in a thimble and still have plenty of room for your finger, knowledge of physics, even though I grew up in a community that was steeped in it. I found a few quotes that I found particularly interesting that I put in this chapter. And the first one is from Niels Bohr, who said, if quantum mechanics hasn't profoundly shocked you, you haven't understood it yet. So it's like, okay, some worldviews are going to shift here. I think an analogous one in the course would have to be, there is no world. This is the central thought the course attempts to teach, right? And it's like, well, okay, what do you make from that? Ken says, well, if that's true, then there is no Bruce, there is no Tim, there is no Sakina, there is no Irene, there's no, put your name goes here, right? But our real identity, of course, is quietly, patiently waiting us for the little inner smile to dawn across our minds to say that that's not a problem. That's actually really good news. Okay, here's another quote from a famous physicist, Werner Heisenberg, who had the uncertainty theory, right? Not only is the universe stranger than we think, it is stranger than we can think, which kind of alludes to the stranger than our ego minds are ever going to think, right? But it's strange and horrific and scary to our egos, but it's the ultimate comfort to what we really are. Okay, here's another one from Brian Greene, a more contemporary physicist. The boldness of asking deep questions may require unforeseen flexibility if we are to accept the answers. Well, that's the little willingness, right? Which in some of Gary Renard's, where he points out that Jesus does the bait and switch in the course. He starts out with little willingness, and then eventually we realize, no, that's just the get in the door. But to actually finish with the summa cum laude, which we'll all do, or magna cum laude, whatever the thing is, we all are going to have abundant willingness to accept Holy Spirit's guidance and trust that, abundant trust, abundant willingness to question every value that we hold. And it doesn't mean we give them up right away. It just means we have to, maybe that's not working. Maybe that's not my best interest. What if that's possible? Here's another one that I didn't put in my book. Well, actually I did. It was further down. This is from Dean Radin, who's a more contemporary researcher. And he says, one of the most surprising discoveries of modern physics is that objects aren't as separate as they may seem. Where have we heard that before, huh? When you drill down into the core of even the most solid-looking material, separateness dissolves. All that remains, like the smile of the Cheshire Cat from Alice in Wonderland, are relationships, extending curiously throughout space and time. These connections were predicted by quantum theory and were called spooky action at a distance by Albert Einstein. One of the founders of quantum theory, Erwin Schrödinger, dubbed this peculiarity entanglement, saying, I would not call that one, but rather the characteristic trait of quantum mechanics. So like that's like the hallmark of what quantum mechanics gave us, is that things aren't separate, they're actually entangled. So they're completely interconnected. I mean, if you follow the breadcrumbs of that theory, right? Okay, here's from William Tiller, from the preface to Stalking the Wild Pendulum by Itzhak Bentov. And his quote is, everything that seems to interact with everything else at many subtle levels of the universe beyond the purely physical level. Oh, everything seems to interact with everything else at many subtle levels of the universe beyond the purely physical level. And the deeper we penetrate into these levels, the more do we realize that we are one. Where have we heard that before? And the Course doesn't try to hurl us into oneness. It just basically says, if you can just consider the sameness and be willing to question the differences and not deny the form, but just use the seeming differences in form as little triggers of the mind and the discomfort that brings to get back to the sameness and see that we're all fighting the same hard battle and we all deserve infinite compassion, or at least, start with a little bit of compassion until we get up to the unconditional, unyielding compassion. So, and then
why did Einstein call it spooky?
Oh, well, it's because with quantum entanglement, the example that I've heard of, and Abe might have some thoughts about this, is you can have two electrons that are paired, and during the time that they are paired, which is called quantum entanglement, you can imagine they have a spin. Okay, so there's an axis of spin, just like the North Pole points to the star Polaris right now, and 12,000 years, I think it pointed to some other star. It was a Vega, I don't know. Anyway, but that spin, the pole of the electron, so to speak, that the angle of its, or orientation of its spin, when the two electrons are paired, is exactly the same, and instantaneously changes. If the spin changes on one, the orientation of the other one changes, not at the speed of sound or the speed of light, or even 100 or a million times the speed of light. It's instantaneously. And that's true not only if they are, a foot away, but also if they are in different galaxies. So it's like, okay, how does the electron A know that it needs to instantaneously change its axis of spin, even if it's a galaxy away, so that it matches its entangled partner?
So it's just not spooky. It sounds pretty spooky, but it's a spooky relationship between the two.
Right. It basically says that our notions of time and space might be questionable, or at least our understanding is certainly incomplete. Even probably any physicist who studied this would probably say that, is that we don't understand how that works, but it does work. And it's one of the fundamental ideas in quantum theory, and what makes smartphones and computers and the same basic premises that quantum theory enabled electronics industry to do crazy, wonderful things. Dave and Abe, or how about Abe and Dave? So I think you had your hand up first, Dave.
Yeah. Let's see. Did you say for me to go first?
It doesn't matter.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah. So anyway, the quantum entanglement is how they is used in building the quantum computers. And they actually have a command that we perfected the technology enough to where we can create an entangled pair of electrons on command, and that's just standard part of the quantum computer technology. It's pretty amazing.
Mm-hmm. And the name of the command to do that entanglement is for Star Trek fans, is in the software, you give it the command of teleport, which I think is kind of cool. I mean, Dave introduced me to quantum computing a few years ago, and we were just like, wow, this is pretty cool stuff. I mean, it's still in its early infancy, but even at that, it's pretty amazing. Yeah. So Abe?
Yeah, so going back to Tim's question about why is this called spooky action at a distance, I think part of the reason is also that, you have to send, if you think of the two objects being separate, you have to send information from object A to object B. And in order to do that, the fastest known thing that we can conceive of is the speed of light.
Mm-hmm.
But as you pointed out, you can have galaxies that are thousands, millions of light years away, and this still would be true. So you would violate, if you're sending information, you obviously would have to send that in a way that would be much faster than the speed of light, which is inconceivable to a lot of folks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So obviously
paradigm busted, right? Yeah. Was that
right? So part of the implication is that then things are not separate.
Exactly.
And if they're not separate, then you don't have to send the information and violate the speed of light.
Bingo. That's it right there, isn't it? I mean, so if space and time are made up ideas, then that would allow the tunneling from one thing that's the same as something else to not have to communicate because they're the same thing, right? Sally, did you have
Christina did, then Sally.
Oh, Christina, okay.
Well, I would just for the record say, science was the thing that brought me to believe more of the course too, when quantum physics came out. But the statement about that it happens in another galaxy, I wonder about that, how they were able to prove it. And just being crazy funny, it was like, was that part of the test in Stargate Atlantis that they were able to confirm that it changed another galaxy?
I think that's just the theory, but they've demonstrated in the lab that that's true. How far apart they separated the labs, or just to demonstrate that this was true, I don't know, but they basically extrapolate from that it doesn't matter how far away you put them. Maybe Abe knows.
Yeah, they've done experiments now where you have a particle in continent A and a particle in continent B, and the connection is through a satellite. And we can measure time to exquisite precision. So we can tell, a giga, 1 billionth of a second kind of thing difference. And they can tell that even at those distances that we can still span on planet Earth, that this holds true to the extent that we can measure time precisely, which is really exquisite.
Yeah.
So things are happening instantaneously at those scales. So nothing has been found that would violate the. Sorry, I have to take this.
Okay. Thanks, Abe. Perfect ringtone.
That was timely.
Perfect ringtone for the coverage. Yeah. Okay. And let's see. Irene, who else was? Oh, and Sally.
Sally, and then Irene.
Sally and Irene. Okay, thanks.
Well, doesn't that explain the one mind?
Yeah. Yeah, probably not, most physicists aren't going to say this now proves all the things that mystics and sages have been saying down through the centuries, because they probably have tenure and all that kind of stuff to fret about. But after the fact, a lot of the physicists that were in Copenhagen and met together, back in the middle of the last century, who all kind of puzzled them when they found out about the wave particle duality, that's like, mind could no longer be discounted, and the quantum entanglement, that kind of stuff. They all kind of looked at each other like, okay, now how do we explain this to the world? Like, physics really isn't physical anymore. Basically, yeah.
There's the one there was a special documentary on PBS that showed this whole theory and how they showed it. They didn't explain how it happened, but they showed that it did happen on another planet. It was replicated, although it was started here.
Yeah,
something like that. But it explains entanglement, the one mind. We're all tangled. Sorry, guys, we're all tangled up.
Man, it's taking me a long time these days just to get from one room to the next. I don't know about jumping across a galaxy.
Yeah.
Irene and then Abby.
This reminds me of, so I actually had to look up exactly what the theory was, but Rupert Sheldrake with the morphogenetic fields, or a resonance, I think, morphogenetic resonance, and did mice in mazes from one part of the world to the other part of the world. And when they learned the maze in one part of the world, ones on the other part of the world immediately learned it too. So you kind of wonder about maybe the one dreamer too. And even our politics, what made me start thinking, what's going on all over the world right now? Energetically, we have one dreamer too.
Ideas don't leave their source, right?
Ideas don't leave their source. Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Thanks,
So-
Erin. Abby?
Yeah, I just, for what it's, throw out that on a recent podcast from the Foundation for Inner Peace, Tamara, Judy Scutch's daughter, said that when she was 89, now she died last year at 91, so it was a couple of years before she died. She said she wanted to learn quantum physics. So a friend would come over who really knew quantum physics every Sunday afternoon. And after a few months, Tamara asked, well, how's it going? And she said, I understand, and it looks like the science is catching up with the course.
It may take a while, but yeah, it will. I mean, because there won't be anything left to conclude other than, oh yeah, maybe the universe was made by unconscious, unfounded guilt. Yeah. Thanks, Abby. Yeah, I remember hearing that in that podcast too. Bruce?
Yeah, I don't know if this pertains or not, but I like to read 13 and 25 of the course on how miracles might pertain to this type of notion.
Okay.
Miracles are both beginnings and endings, and so they alter the temporal order. They are always affirmations of rebirth, seem to go back, but really go forward. They undo the past and the present, and thus release the future. That way, everything that's our reactions there are for forgiveness can go forward and backward in time to understand that the thing that we forgive now in a certain situation might be versa temporally going forward to forgive a situation that we need to forgive in the past or the future. And on 25, it says miracles are part of an interlocking chain of forgiveness, which when completed is the atonement. Atonement works all the time and in all the dimensions of time.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Just to interrelate what you're saying to our forgiveness lessons, it could be looked at as a basis of understanding of how our forgiveness works through the dimension of our past, present, or seemingly past, present, and future that we have to forgive.
For sure. Yeah, and it really, it's the transcendence of time and space that the course, I think, is leading us to. A quick aside, I think I read somewhere which I found interesting, is that matter, as we think of it, has 3 spatial dimensions and 1 temporal dimensions, but there's I'm not sure if you call it a particle, but a thing called a tachyon that, if I remember correctly, it has 3 temporal dimensions and 1 spatial dimension. Of course, that's all made up, but just one of those kind of weird, cool things to blow your mind on. Pondering, trying to figure out how the material universe that doesn't exist works, right?
I was thinking, like, the usual question is, how could forgiveness, when it happens in my mind, affect everybody else's mind? But the way we're talking about all this stuff, it's like, how could it not?
Exactly. Yeah. How could it not? If space and time really are fabrications of a misunderstanding, a misinterpretation, and that ego thought system is nothing but a misinterpretation, and we have an entire cosmos that's predicated on that misinterpretation, how could, it's just like in a lot of Ken Wapnick's talks, he's like, well, be nice to your toaster, be nice to your sock or your pair of scissors or whatever you happen to be dealing with, because certainly your cat or your your neighbor, whatever, but all those seemingly inanimate things too, because they're all connected. They're all one thing, and modern physics does seem to suggest that. So anyway, so I wrote a little bit more. Abe, yeah.
I read somewhere that I tend to believe in, that a lot of the physicists that work in quantum mechanics, they do not like to ponder these deep questions about the implications of the theory, because it freaks them out.
Yeah.
It scares them, and a scared physicist doesn't write good papers and doesn't get promotions and so forth. And so here's where the course takes the next step. It helps us get through that freak out period. And get past it.
Yeah.
And the physicists right now in quantum mechanics do not have that tool. So maybe we should send them all a copy of the course.
Well, I think it freaks out most course students too.
Yeah, exactly. There's no exemption for physicists or non-physicists. Exactly. It's a universal application there. Yeah. Lisa?
Okay, I'm really sorry. I don't know anything about quantum physics.
None of us really do. We're all just making it up, right?
But from what I'm hearing, it sounds like it's just like another really out there dimension of the illusion, the physical universe that we hadn't considered before. Or is it now saying what I think some people would like to think is that it really is part of, that it's real? That means it's real. Does my question make any sense?
Yeah. I think it's because we're all trying to make the material universe real, and the course would suggest that our real reality has nothing to do with space and time and bodies and cosmos, because quarks to quasars, the whole spectrum in between, right? But we need to be normal within that dream and use every little bit of that to get back to our mind, and particularly ask Holy Spirit, like Abe was saying, let's get past the fear thought system so that we can really truly be scientific and religious in the best use of that word, to finding out what's true, as Richard Bach liked to call what true religion is. True science is like, well, what doesn't change? What's true? And I think at the heart of all that really is wanting to know what's stable, what's my refuge, like yesterday's book lesson was suggesting. So what can I count on here? Well, I can't really count on the world being stable. It's an unstable place. And even the second law of thermodynamics says that, after a certain amount of time, it may take a few million or billion years, but it's going to be just a big blob of heat of random particles floating around in the dark. But it's just not, a terribly attractive, outcome. But if it's made up, if we made up this dream, then we can use it to, as a mechanism to get back to our minds and see that it was made up, and that there really is a reality that's deeper and beyond all the forms that we're so enamored with. Right?
But quantum physics doesn't go that far.
Well, I'm mixing what some of these quotes with physicists who did get a mystical inspiration from what they were studying. And as Abe was pointing out, the more you ponder it, the more it's like, oh, gee, I can't really go there, because it basically undoes so much of common sense notions about reality.
Right.
And
it's really
we use the technology that it's based on all the time, every day. Anything with solid state electronics pretty much uses that. But
it's really it's just really mind-boggling and interesting. But even at the nth degree, it's still part of the universe, right? Part of the physical universe.
Yeah. and the physical universe, physicists are saying, maybe not that physical. It's not that they're denying the physicality. It's just that they're saying, well, maybe there's, something more to it. And the mind is really, could no longer be conveniently shoved out of the picture. In the Newtonian model just kind of fell apart in the last century when quantum mechanics was born, because it's like, well, you can't take mind out of the equation anymore.
Thank you.
Yeah. So
Sorry. Yeah.
Oh, no problem. Yeah. Bruce?
Yeah, well, with the Course, and the Holy Spirit and understanding, but trying to understand through the Holy Spirit without really knowing what to understand. We can't have faith in the miracle, because the miracle can understand the temporal order of the universe we've made up and bring us back to our real truth, through the decision-making mind.
Yeah.
For the Son of God. And just in that alone, I can hold my understanding through the Holy Spirit and trying to get to the truth of who I really am, or what I really am, in that type of the universe of spirit. Anyway.
Yeah, and we need Holy Spirit every step of the way to and that trust is crucial to navigate out of the dream, because we're so immersed in our Newtonian model, if you will, the idea that we're just pawns in a big chess game, but we made up the game. Like Kirk in the Kobayashi Maru episode of Star Trek. He's like, we just have to reprogram the computer, because the Holy Spirit do it for us, better yet. So that there is a solution to the ego's no-win game. Yeah. Christina, did you?
I think Sally, then maybe Christine.
Okay. And then Stephen. Okay. Well, it's getting a lot of good discussion. I mean, I get through all the stuff.
Nobody wants to listen to you, Bruce.
That's fine. That's fine. That's good.
You started it. Now we're. Well,
Okay.
it seems like the scientists and of course the miracles students are all looking for the mystery. It's the mystery they're looking for. They call it quantum whatever they want, but they can't explain, and they can't explain God, and neither can we. Well, we know God is love, right? But that, how do you define? You can't define love. So
we don't even know what mind is, right? I mean, let alone God. Yeah.
All ephemeral. So anyway, I just kind of put two and two together, and I realized, but they're really looking for the mystery.
Yeah.
Why am I here? What am I doing here? And how am I going to get out? Something like that.
Yep. We're all fighting the same hard battle of the duality we made up and forgot that we made it up.
What
Right?
the hell's going on? Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. What's next? Stephen?
I think Christina.
Christina was next.
Christina. Okay, Christina.
Okay, well, I'll just be real brief too, because I was just pondering a little bit more about what Abe had brought up before, about that they only can go so far, and then they really get afraid. And I was relating that to the ego and its mechanics of keeping us mindless and don't look.
Bingo. I give you three affirmatives. Yeah, because we're all fighting that same resistance. It doesn't matter if you're in physics or a tree trimmer or a brain surgeon. We're all working against the flow of ego's inexorable current against looking at the mind and seeing what's going on there. The inner and outer shields of oblivion, as Ken was talking about. Saying I can't go there because that's where then I'm responsible if I do lesson 5, and if I do lesson 34 on top of that, then no, I could see peace instead of this, and then am I going to go poof? No, Mr. Bill. But we already kind of did the anti-poof. We poofed ourselves into the dream. So if we can remember that, we'll eventually want to poof ourselves out of it. Yeah. So
Did you say poof or pooped?
I think we got here through the one with the two P's. Yeah. Exactly. That's good. Was there someone else had a comment or question? Stephen, of course. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, a few decades ago, I was doing thought experiments on unified field theory, and I got to the point where it was outside anything I was thinking about. But I just made a decision that I came to the conclusion that everything is made of waves, everything. And when I say everything, I mean like matter, time, any kind of plasma type thing. Unknowns would fit into this. Even when I don't even think I knew about dark matter then, but dark matter fits into this too, because all of that, which is all different, but time, energy, matter, plasma, unknowns, dark matter, it's all instantaneously interchangeable. And we don't, I'm not going to say that I have any idea whatsoever how that might work. But if everything is made out of one thing, then that confirms the one mind, and it confirms the fact that oneness actually does seem to exist in the world. And it would also answer the question of how did Son of God really do this? Because that would transfer to everything we know in the universe because of the instantaneous interchangeable nature of what those waves might be. There's no, I don't have any idea what the wave thing would look like, but everything would have to be instantaneously interchangeable for this theory to be correct. And I think it is. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. And that instantaneous, the term I've heard, Abe probably knows more about this too, but is collapsing the wave function. That basically, whenever we think about something using our dualistic mind, my tiny understanding about this would be that our belief in separation, moment to moment to moment, collapses the wave function. In fact, how about if I read a little bit more, because it kind of gets into that. So I'm just going to read like 3 paragraphs that I put in this writing I did a decade ago. Okay, the fact that paired electrons change their spin instantaneously with no apparent mechanism to explain this communication was quite a shock to the physicist who did the math and met in Copenhagen several decades ago to share this discovery and ponder its staggering aftermath, pun intended. This pairing has been repeated time after time in the laboratory. Nowadays, quantum entanglement is generally recognized as fact, yet for most of us in the quantum age, the implications are conveniently ignored when it comes to applying this principle of universal connectedness on a personal level, or transpersonal level, more importantly. Like contractors who build houses as if the earth were flat, we generally live our lives as if post-Newtonian physics hadn't happened, as if our selected thoughts, feelings, beliefs, and attitudes about our, quote, reality didn't have any bearing on the quality of our experience of life. The Newtonian cop-out is to behave as if the billiard balls don't affect each other, or as if the ecologically challenged behaviors on one side of the planet don't influence the other side of the planet. Yet we're talking inner ecology here. If we are making this universe up, we can make it up by interpreting it differently. In fact, we evidently have 10 to the 44th power, that's 1 with 44 zeros after it, opportunities per second, roughly the Planck time constant, as it's called, to make up the big cosmic hologram from scratch. Well, that's the tiny mad idea. We're reenacting an unimaginably vast number of times every second, about 1 with 44 zeros after it. How many times per second? That's how often physics tells us that the universe stroboscopically winks out of existence and rematerializes out of nothing every second. And we've been told that our universe has been around a long time. What a lie. So if you think you don't have opportunities to choose differently, if you can remember 1 with 44 zeros after it and remind yourself that you've had that many chances to re-envision your life from quarks to quasars, to release all of it in your mind from your inner blame thrower in the past second. Anyway, I just think that's kind of a fun thing. It's just imagine that in unimaginably fast rate that we're like stroboscopically reinventing the Big Bang. And Jesus said in the Course, why are you complaining about what happened in the past, about the tiny matter? We keep doing it over and over every second, gazillions of times, right? And then let's see. Here's a few more quotes I think are kind of fun. This is in a section called "Things Aren't What They Seem to Be." Mind can't be removed from the equations of matter. Newton's physical model was incomplete. The double slit experiment in wave particle duality showed that is true. And that's basically, you can't, if you expect a certain outcome, you're going to get that outcome. If you expect a particle, you get a particle. If you expect a wave, you get a wave. And then we talked about entangled minds. Physicists talk about entangled particles, but entangled minds is really a very familiar idea of the Course, is that minds are one. Our real identity is one. No matter how far apart seemingly separate things seem to be entangled, particles track instantaneously, light years or inches. Here's just to mix it up a bit, here's a quote from a book that we read in a class by Charlie Tart, who invented this term altered states of consciousness. I was enthralled in his classes at UC Davis when I was an undergraduate there. So we read one of these books, was Wisdom of the Idiots and Tales of the Dervishes by Idris Shah. This is one of the quotes in that. I really like this. Really, very simple. It's a simple math here. A father said to his double seeing son, "Son, you see two instead of one." "How can that be?" the boy replied. "If I were, there would seem to be 4 moons up there in place of 2. I almost like that one. I just think it's really, really cute and simple. It's like, but we all see double here. We all see duality. We all see space and time as if they're real and separate objects. And there's a subject and an object, a we and a they. And we fragmented we and they and thinking into so many permutations, we can't even keep track of it, can we? Here's another one from another favorite book from a few decades ago, from Jonathan Livingston Seagull, Richard Bach. "If our friendship depends on things like space and time, then when we finally overcome space and time, we've destroyed our own brotherhood. But overcome space and all we have left is here. Overcome time and all we have left is now. And in the middle of here and now, don't you think that we might see each other once or twice?" And then workbook lesson 2 comes to mind. "I've given everything I see in this room, on the street, from this window, in this place, all the meaning that it has for me." So yeah, mostly empty space, subatomic, interplanetary, and galactic levels, but we fill in the gaps in between with a whole lot of nothing. We daily trust technology we don't see or understand, electrons, complex software, lots of tech based on modern physics, yet we don't question the implications or assumptions that so much of our lives are based on. And synchronistically, I just got an email from my childhood friend who worked at the lab. I'll have to read that later. A little message came in. Okay, here's a quote from Rumi. "I am so small I can barely be seen. How can this great love be inside me? Look at your eyes. They are small, but they see enormous things." And then we already talked about the Planck time constants. Let me jump over to, here's a quote from Gary Renard. "You're a non-local being having a local experience." And then the Big Bang being a reflection of the tiny matter in the form of the tiny matter idea. So if the tiny matter idea is, the idea that separation happened, the Big Bang as we think of it, in terms of physics would just be a reflection of that. And we keep fragmenting and fragmenting and coming up with more and more complicated and complex permutations of things to keep the ego mind, off track and off balance, which is what it made up to try to do to keep us from ever getting back to the mind, right? Oh, so here's another little trivia thing that really grabbed my attention when I was in high school. I think Dave, you had Mr. Trimmingham too, didn't you, Dave? Yeah. He was one of our science teachers. He said in one of the chemistry or physics class, he says, "Space is mostly empty if," and he said, I'm paraphrasing, he said, "if the nucleus of an atom was the size of a soccer ball, the nearest electron would be about 4 miles away, which is where Lawrence Livermore Lab was at the time. He said it was at the Rad Lab, as we called it, or East Avenue Hardware, as my dad called it, because he would bring home electronics for me to play with from the junk pile. Okay. I looked up in the course, there are 988 instances of time, 65 of space, 19 of distance, 177 of the word far, and 612 instances of the word separation in the course. That's a whole lot of things that we're given in the course to help us undo the belief in separation, time, space, distance, and things being far, which would of course include loneliness, uncertainty, and fear, right? Okay, and let's see, how are we doing here? A few more quotes, and then we can read some stuff in the course that tie it all together. Physicist John Wheeler said, I think I got this quote right, there's no out there, meaning it's like this, it's the so-called objective reality isn't so until we think about something and collapse the wave function. Albert Einstein said, reality is merely an illusion, albeit a very persistent one. And here's some of Ken's comments. This is about time from pages 32 to 33 in Journey Through the Text, Volume 1. And Ken says, time is one of the most elusive aspects of A Course in Miracles, as it has been for thinkers throughout the centuries. There really is no systematic exposition of time in the Course, just brief statements here and there. When I wrote my book on time many years ago, which is a really amazing book, The Vast Illusion, yeah, that's quite good. I extracted the passages on time strewn throughout the text, workbook, and manual to provide a coherent presentation of the course's theory. One of the reasons the material on time is scattered around is that our capacity to understand it is so limited, as Jesus explains in this passage from the workbook. And this is one of those things that's very frustrating, but it's true. There is no need to further clarify what no one in the world can understand. Yet what meaning can the words convey to those who count the hours still and rise and work and go to sleep by them? That's from lesson 169, right? And then he continues, our lives are organized around the belief that time is linear. The workbook itself has a linear structure, there being 365 lessons based on a calendar year. Jesus's exhortation to Helen and Bill about mind training and study implies linearity. Early sections and chapters, and then later ones. Indeed, since all functioning in the world is based on linear time, the unreality of time seems inconceivable to us. Physicists in the 20th century, starting with Einstein, have spoken of time's unreality, but their radical ideas have not penetrated very far into the teachings of traditional physics, nor have they had a noticeable effect on the world's thinking. Yet, despite our difficulties in understanding it, time remains an important part of the course's teaching. And then continue on. By far the majority are giving a slowly evolving training program in which as many previous mistakes as possible are corrected. And this is from the manual section 9. Relationships in particular must be properly perceived and all dark cornerstones of unforgiveness removed. You could also say all dark cornerstones of the belief in duality, right? Otherwise, the old thought system still has a basis for return. And then Ken's comment in the Journey Through the Manual is, note the word slowly evolving, as in being gentle, patient, kind, and merciful. This means there is no hurry to accomplish anything, including me getting through the notes that I wrote for this session. Reminder to self. Okay, since we've already been healed, indeed, we have never not been healed. What is the rush? If, however, we feel a sense of urgency, it is only because we have made time real, thus making its source of sin, guilt, and fear real as well. The need for this slow evolution is our fear of love, which leads to our resistance against moving too quickly. So that's probably why, physics hasn't just jumped into, oh, let's explore the idea that the universe was made by guilt. Mañana, we'll get to it, maybe. Never. Okay. And let's see. Oh, this one I found on Facebook the other day. I think it might have been in the Pun Appreciated Facebook page. I just thought this was cute. It says, I just found out Albert Einstein was a real person. All this time I thought he was a theoretical physicist. Isn't that good? I thought that's pretty good. Well, we're all theoretical here as course students, right? Okay. So I was going to mention one thing just in terms of contemporary physicists who are kind of bucking the physicality notion of physics, and you know, having the courage to venture out with a mental perspective. This is a fellow named where's this? Okay, let me find that again. It's Donald Hoffman is his name. And anyway, he's done some interesting stuff, and he has a background in physics, and yet he's willing to consider the idea that, well, what if, and he says explicitly that he says, if you start with the premise that you know, the material world is real, that, you know, the world of space and time and particles is real, and try to get the math to work out, he says you just can't get there. And he says he and other, you know, scientists have been working on it for decades, and every time they try to go from that premise, they just end up roadblock after roadblock. But he says that the math is starting to work out, if I'm remembering this correctly, and I'm probably paraphrasing, so it'd probably be best to hear it directly from what he said. But he says the math is starting to work out when you start with the premise that mind is real and that matter is derived from mind. Then it works. Then the math starts to work out. And I thought, well, that's pretty cool. I mean, he says a lot of other interesting things, but if you Google Donald Hoffman, you'll find some interesting stuff. I did a post or two on ACIM blog about his stuff that's, I think, pretty worth checking into. So meanwhile, any other comments or questions at this point?
I was feeling sorry for the letter D. It seems like it gets all the bad raps. Duality, dream, death, all the DIS words, dis-ease, disrespect, disingenuine.
How about duh?
Duh. and then my favorite, I think it's AC/DC. This is what the ego sings all the time. Dirty deeds done dirt cheap.
That's almost a perfect alliteration there.
That's so good. Dirty deeds done dirt cheap. Now I'll never get that song out of my head.
That's good. That's good. Very good. Yeah. Let me get to the right page here. Okay. I thought what would be fun to do is just read a little bit of that, where I found one of those quotes, and just kind of read it in light of what we had just been talking about. We could probably read any section of the course and you know, think in terms of, you know, what modern physics is saying, that duality is really a suspicious premise. Space and time, you know, as we think we understand them, may, you know, be a very incomplete understanding. And just maybe, like Donald Hoffman is suggesting, maybe we need to start with mind in order to understand matter, rather than trying to go the other way. So, which I think is admirable that he's willing to start with that premise. So for example, if we go to chapter 10, section 5, which is the denial of God, I think that kind of fits very nicely with what we do with our material perspective of things, of believing that that's the only reality. In fact, we don't even consider that mind is real, let alone that there's a decision-making faculty in the mind that can choose against the belief in separation altogether.
Another D word.
Denial.
It's the river in Egypt.
It's on page 189.
Oh, 189. Thank you. So I'll just read the first paragraph, and then we can do a little extrapolation with some of the ideas that we've been talking about. So the denial of God, the rituals of the god of sickness. How about the rituals of the god of duality, the god of materiality, the god of space, time is everything and mind is nothing, are strange and very demanding. There's another D, demanding. Head to the D list.
Depression is coming up.
It's discouraging, isn't it? Joy is never permitted, for depression is the sign of allegiance to him. Well, when it's if we think that we're just matter and bodies and just victims of a space-time paradigm that says that's our only reality and we're separate from all the other things, and we're not quantum entangled, we're isolated, we have every excuse to feel lonely because all these alleged others are out there somewhere, even though physicist John Wheeler said there's no out there. So depression means that you have forsworn God. We've forsworn oneness. We've said that the perfect entanglement of love with love, didn't happen in ego's theology, right? Many are afraid of blasphemy, but they do not understand what it means. They do not realize that to deny God is to deny their own identity. So to deny oneness is to deny our real self that exists beyond space and time, or as Richard Bach put it, everywhere at once across space and time. But I like beyond better because it's sort of like space and time still has some problems. I think we need to go past it altogether at some point. But we go peace before we go poof, right, Tim? So we don't have to worry about that for a while. Okay. They do not realize that to deny God is to deny their own identity. And in this sense, the wages of sin, the wages of separation, the wages of substitution, the wages of specialness made by implicit, tacit belief in space-time and particles as our identity is death. There's another D. The sense is very literal. Denial of life perceives its opposite, as all forms of denial replace what is with what is not. No one can really do this, but that you think you can and believe you have is beyond dispute. Well, walk up to anybody on any random street corner and ask if reality consists, the material world is reality, and however you phrase it, most people are going to say, yeah, pretty much. Even in a new age community, that they may not admit it, but we all, I think, even if we have been studying this for years, we have an enormous amount of inertia and momentum toward maintaining that. And I think that's, again, that need to be gentle and patient with our own resistance and just say, oh yeah, that's right. I taught myself this over how many lifetimes? Yeah. Any comments on that so far? Or thoughts or questions? Does that kind of make sense to kind of just, extrapolate where modern physics, I think modern physics and the mysticism of, sages throughout the millennia, Jesus, of course, being, our favorite go-to guy, but, people like Nisargadatta, Ramana Maharshi, Muji, people that, kind of figure this stuff out, seem like they're all converging on that same thing. And I think modern physics really, even though you got to connect a lot of dots to get there, but it does seem like it's moving in that direction based on the things that they don't want to look at because it's repeatable and inconvenient truths, right? Okay. How about if we go to the next one? Do not forget, however, that to deny God will inevitably result in projection, and you will believe that others and not yourself have done this to you. So if I deny the entanglement of love with love, I deny the oneness of mind, if I deny the fact that there's a reality beyond the material universe, that results in projection because, I got to make up something to fill the gap, right? So the projection is the entire world. the Course says is a misunderstanding. You know, it even says there's no world, not the way we think of it anyway, right? You must receive the message you give because it is the message you want. So we wanted a physical universe. We wanted that because it provided the perfect scapegoat. You may believe, well, almost perfect. When we don't feel at peace, it's like, okay, there's the way out. There's the clue. You must receive the message you give because it's a message you want. You may believe that you judge your brothers by the message they give you, but you have judged them by the message you give them. So entangled minds, you know, are in constant communication because there is just one mind and, you know, there is no other. Do not attribute your denial of joy to them, or you cannot see the spark in them that would bring joy to you. It is the denial of the spark that brings depression. For whenever you see your brothers without it, you are denying God. Allegiance to the denial of God is the ego's religion. You could also say allegiance to the denial of God is the ego's science. You know, it's pseudoscience, because the ego wants to find things that are conditionally true, not eternally true. and if the material universe isn't really eternal, you know, if enough billions of years from now, and it's like, well, it may have morphed into something else, but it really, you know, if anything that can change, if truth is defined as what can't change, then anything involving space and time would have to be untrue by that definition. I mean, even if you just work with that a little bit, I find it helpful anyway. It's like if something changes, it's not where I want to, you know, base my foundation on. The God of sickness, the God of change, the God of duality, the God of space and time obviously demands the denial of health, the denial of sanity, the denial of peace, because health or peace or the recognition of the perfect entanglement of oneness is in direct opposition to its own survival. But consider what this means to you. Unless you are sick, you cannot keep the gods you made, for only in sickness could you possibly want them. Well, we're all slowly but surely seeing that the gods we made and their manifestations in space and time haven't worked out as well as we planned, right? Blasphemy then is self-destructive, not God-destructive. So essentially the blasphemy that he's talking about here is basically saying that at some point we're going to want the world as we made it, the world of guilt, to disappear, and it will merely cease to seem to be. And we'll be, you know, we'll be not only okay with that, we'll be ecstatic. It's like everything that we feared, dreaded, made us angry, whatever that we made up, will no longer be the software that we're running. We will have changed the program. Blasphemy then is self-destructive, little less self, not God-destructive. We made up the separation, and we're going to want to not destroy it, but just to let it disappear, let it dissolve. It means that you are willing not to know yourself in order to be sick. This is the offering your God demands, because having made him out of your insanity, he's an insane idea. So every time we think that there's something in the world that we want to make us happy, that's an insane idea, and it's a very demanding one. But at some point we will let go of wanting what doesn't make us happy. It would seem. Yeah. He has many forms, but although he may seem to be many different things, he is but one idea: the denial of God, the denial of perfect oneness, perfect interconnectedness. I mean, we use words like that to try to describe oneness and things like sameness, because that's where we can kind of relate to it. Sickness and death seem to enter the mind of God's Son against his will. The attack on God, the Big Bang, the tiny mad idea, made his Son think he was fatherless. And out of his depression, he made the God of depression. And all the other D words. This was, in Tim's list, not all D words necessarily, but yeah. This was his alternative to joy, because he would not accept the fact that, although he was a creator, he had been created. And there's the authority problem again, right? Yet the Son is helpless without the Father, who alone is his help. So that kind of reminds me of, Donald Hoffman's premise of like, well, what if mind is primary? What if that's the one premise that works, that we're mind and bodies are just a little blip on the radar that occur when we collapse the wave function and make form a big deal. keep rehashing that story 10 to the 44th times per second in this hologram of unimaginable complexity and beyond stellar production value. Wow, that's convincing, isn't it? I said before that of yourself you can do nothing, but you are not of yourself. If you were, what you have made would be true, and you could never escape. It is because you did not make yourself that you need be troubled over nothing. Your gods are nothing. Our space-time obsessions and preoccupations are nothing in truth. To us, they're a big deal, right? And the Course points that out. So don't be hard on ourselves when we make big deals out of nothing, much ado about nothing. It is because you did not make yourself that you need be troubled over nothing. Your God is nothing. Okay, you cannot make creators who are unlike your creator any more than he could have created a son who was unlike him. If creation is sharing, it cannot create what is unlike itself. It can share only what it is. And I'm thinking of that quantum entanglement again. It's like, well, the sharing, we think of sharing as involving, two or more, right? But for quantum entanglement to work, it would almost seem like you have to embrace the idea of a oneness joined as one somehow. There almost has to be some kind of premise that considers that possibility. And that, or at least that space and time have got some serious, wormholes or loopholes or something that is connecting them instantaneously and transcending the whole space-time notion. Yeah. Okay. Depression is isolation, so it could not have been created. Basically saying that, we've got everything backwards, upside down and inside out. Isolation is a misunderstanding. But because we've inverted everything, we have quantum mechanics and quantum computers that with a lot of effort and huge amounts of funding, we can do, in its infancy, these as Dave was pointing out, these pretty cool things actually with using quantum technology to do computations that are promising because they can solve countless problems at once rather than having to do in a linear kind of a thing. And I don't begin to understand hardly any of that, but it's just kind of a cool conceptually. But it seems like that's just kind of like not only the tip of the iceberg, but just kind of like, using, I don't know what a good analogy is, but using something in an incredibly limited way to do something that's trivial when a masterpiece is waiting for us to dive into it, kind of thing. I don't know. We're just basically dabbling with the idea that separation is bogus. But if we could invert it and just get to the point, and I think the Course is leading us there, to the idea that separation is hilariously ludicrous, that if we can entertain that more and more, the possibilities are just staggering. So here's that line that I really like. It really just basically says, you know, it's just an error. It's a mistake. Sin was not possible in eternity. Son of God, you have not sinned, but you have been much mistaken. So just like, you know, Columbus didn't fall off the edge of the earth, and you know, now we may not build houses, you know, taking into account the curvature of the earth, but you know, we still kind of generally acknowledge that, you know, we see enough photos from space of the earth and say, oh, okay, it's sort of spherical, you know, it's spheroid, I guess is an actual shape, right? But it's like, well, maybe what if we actually think about where physics is leading us to, the metaphysics of non-duality. That could be pretty amazing if we really thought where it led. And more importantly, not just in the world, which could have some pretty cool spin-offs and might make the dream more pleasant, but more importantly, we could wake up from the dream, and that's to me the whole point of it. Right? So anyway, I think I've about used it. Is this an hour and a half or an hour and 15 session? I'm trying to remember.
Normally Mondays we try to stick to 75, but
75. Okay. Well, let me wrap up then with today's lesson, which I think really fits nicely, which is lesson 262. Let me perceive no differences today. So let's see. Irene, would you like to read that? And you're on mute. Oh.
Getting there.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, 262.
I'd love to. Thank you.
Thank you.
Father, you have one son, and it is he that I would look upon today. He is your one creation. Why should I perceive 1,000 forms in what remains as one? Why should I give this one 1,000 names when only one suffices? For your son must hear your name, for you created him. Let me not see him as a stranger to his father, nor as a stranger to myself. For he is part of me, and I of him, and we are part of you, who are our source, eternally united in your love, eternally the Holy Son of God. We who are one would recognize this day the truth about ourselves. We would come home and rest in unity, for there is peace, and nowhere else can peace be sought and found.
Thanks, Irene. Let's
Amen.
take a moment and reflect on that. I'll bring us back. Okay, thank you all. I was just thinking maybe we could paraphrase a Huey Lewis song, and so I'm happy to be eternally entangled with you.
Thank you. This was so interesting. It really made me expand my whole thought system a little bit. So, yeah.
We're all in it together, huh? Yeah. Yep. Thanks.
I'm gonna look forward to entangling with Jesus tonight. Thanks.
Good.
Thanks.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thanks,
Great
everybody.
class.
Thanks,
Thanks all.
Peace, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you
Everybody
all.
else.
Thanks,
Sorry
everyone.
for my
Thank
stupid
you.
question.
I'm entangled in the entire area.